What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Sun Belt Syndicate, the Round Ball Roundup edition. Unfortunately, for all of you, co-hostless. We will continue to work on that so we have a solid, steady person to be alongside of me. But before we get off and rolling here, talking about what's happened this week and also what's coming up on Friday night, before we get into the conference tournament, we'll also take a look at that. I do want to mention that we are sponsored and brought to you by collegefootballdogs.com, and we have kind of rebranded. We've gone away from the Dogs Media Network. We are now calling it Dog TV. So it'll be a little bit easier for me to say Dog TV. We are part of that. We are also sponsored down below by W Energy. Use SB Syndicate at checkout. I have just picked up my W. Finally, this flavor I couldn't say no to. It is called the Sour Gummy Bears. Liquid sour gummy bears. Sign me up. Big candy guy. If you are a energy drink caffeine fan, this is your clean caffeine energy, jitterless, crashless. So definitely try it out. It is built and made for gamers. That is mostly on the PC and PlayStation and Xbox side. However, we're going to bring that gaming to a different level when we're talking about sports. And this one is obviously specifically about basketball here tonight, specifically Sun Belt basketball. That's probably why you came in here. So we will get off and rolling right away, bringing up what we're calling this episode the season finale, as it is tomorrow night for every team in the conference. As we know, sometimes in those midweeks, we had 2 or 3 games on Wednesday or Tuesday, as it may be this week, and then everyone finished up the next day. However, tomorrow night, everyone will go, both men's and women's side actually, will all finish up on Friday. So it'll be a nice, fun finish for those couple of spots that are still up for grabs. Again, we'll take a look at that here as we get into some of this action. First up, on the men's side, we did have a score on Tuesday of 73 for Texas State. However, I almost said ULM first. Texas State took that one over ULM 73-55. Sykes led the way for Texas State with 10 points and 10 rebounds as well. Bolden led the way for the Warhawks with 12 points. Overall, this one probably not the most exciting matchup going into it, but we did have to mention that one going in there to start off the week, since that was the only game there to go on Tuesday night. So jumping into the larger slate, which included all of Wednesday's action and all the rest of the teams going live on that one, we had App State staying on top of the Sun Belt, beating Old Dominion 89-64 in that one. Spillers with a double-double, massive game for him, 18.16 rebounds. That's not a typo. That's not me misspeaking. 16 rebounds, almost as many rebounds as he had points on the night. Just an absolutely fantastic game for the Mountaineers, led from start to finish. I will say I did think, not necessarily the game being in doubt, but I did think that Old Dominion did have a chance to close the gap. They kind of went on a streak, a decent and good streak to start the second half, and App State was cold there for a little while, but they did end up rounding back into form and controlling that one all the way down the stretch. Some massive dunks, some plays. If you saw the one, if you're a ESPN or SportsCenter fan, the around the back, behind the back pass from, I believe it was Harcum to Donovan Gregory. If anyone here is watching that was watching that one live, I forget which player it was. Maybe it'd been Tate to Gregory even. But either way, it looked like it was going to be a fumbled kind of little play, but he still gets around the back. Good enough for number 5 on SportsCenter's top 10. Pretty cool thing for Sun Belt basketball to end up on, no matter who it is, because we just don't get as many eyes on this league as we'd like to see going forward. Williams did lead the Monarchs with 15 points, but again, just a disappointing performance for them all the way around. I think the score was almost like 20-2 to start the game. I mean, it was pretty bad for those who weren't watching. So App State rounds into form as they get up to the season finale in Boone on Friday night. James Madison stays up there at the top of the conference as well, beating Georgia State 84-78. Edwards as he's been all season long for the Dukes, just a very solid contributor and scorer of the basket. He leads the way with 30 points for JMU. Turner, who's had some pretty good games actually for Georgia State and kept this one relatively close here towards the end, goes for 14 points, 10 rebounds, double-double for him on the night, but not enough to take down the Dukes, as again, they stay up there towards the top of the conference. Georgia State not getting quite where they want to be back in the Sun Belt standings as of yet. Marshall falls to Georgia Southern. Again, Georgia Southern, a team struggling to get wins outside of the conference before conference play starting up. They do rebound a little bit once conference play starts, end up with 7 victories in the conference thus far with a chance for 8 on Friday night. They take down Marshall behind Moore's 23 points in that one. Vols for the Thundering Herd goes for 22 points, 6 rebounds. So massive game for him, but not enough from his teammates to get past those pesky Eagles from Statesboro, Georgia. So we'll see if Georgia Southern could be a little bit of a surprise here come conference tournament time. I know a lot of people didn't expect them to do much of anything throughout the season, especially when you come into conference play winless, but they've come in here and they've won 7 games. They've played some people close. They took App State to overtime, very easily could have won that game down there in Statesboro as well. They had some lopsided games each way with Georgia State. So we'll talk about them here in just a minute, but they do get that victory there over Marshall. Arkansas State takes out Coastal Carolina 71-60. This one decently close at the half, just a 7-point game. I thought Arkansas State would kind of perform much like App State against Old Dominion in this one, actually. I thought Arkansas State is streaking right now. They have hot shooters from beyond the arc, and Coastal is obviously not having a great season. So I thought Arkansas State, trying to fight for the top 4 spot in the Sun Belt tournament, would really hammer them home in this one. They did win comfortably in the end by 11 points, but a little bit closer than I would have expected there at the half. Nelson led the way for Arkansas State, 16 points, 12 rebounds. Ajoku, 14 points, 15 rebounds. Very similar performances there. So 2 really, really good players on the court. But ultimately, the Red Wolves just too much for the Chanticleers down there in Conway, South Carolina. They take home the victory. And a little bit of a surprise here at the end. Although, if you remember from last season, this is a team that got hot, made it all the way to the conference championship game in the tournament last season. South Alabama Jaguars take down Southern Miss 73-70 in that one. Corbello goes 25 points, 6 rebounds. Bargrave, 18 points to lead the Jags and ultimately to the victory. Tie game at the half. Again, Jaguars squeak it out. A hard-fought victory. Both these teams get pretty physical down low. Southern Miss is kind of a tailored to that, right? I mean, we've seen that over the past couple years. They win the regular season championship last year, ultimately fall out in the tournament, but they were the regular season champs. We do have to remember that. They were a pretty heavy favorite again coming into this year, decimated pretty quickly before the season really even got started with injuries, and then had a couple different times where some guys went down during the games. We mentioned this on a previous podcast when TJ was a guest on the show, that, you know, we've had a couple of their players end up bloodied when they're playing down low very aggressively. So this one, pretty physical both ways. But again, Jaguars squeak it out. Can they get hot like they were last year? I don't know if they have the talent that they had last year. In fact, I know they don't have the talent that they had last year on the roster, because even though they went on a run last year, they were better positioned coming in before they are going to be this season, this time around. But they could still be dangerous. They do still have some players. Gator out there playing very well most nights. Definitely a leader on their squad. I don't think, let me pull up. I don't know if he had an actual great game here the other night, but we'll check on that real quick as we're talking through this, because he is a one. If he is hot and he is on, they definitely could pull an upset or two in the tournament. And let's see. Oh, he wasn't even a starter the other night, only had 4 points. So he may be a little banged up at this point. I'm not sure why he's not playing as much, but we'll see what they can do when they round into form there in that one. And to round out the night, we had Troy going up against Louisiana a couple weeks ago. You probably would have thought this was one of the more marquee matchups that you could have seen in the Sun Belt. Unfortunately for Louisiana, their season has really gone downhill since a matchup with around that time that they played App State. actually, is really when that started to turn. Eugene goes for 18 points, 8 rebounds. Kobe Julian, 21 points, 6 rebounds, but again, not enough. This game, not really in question. It was reasonable at the half, 43-39, so very, very much within striking distance for the Cajuns. But the crowd really disappointing down there in Cajun country. I know guys on Rage and Review had talked about that, and there's some kind of issue going on with all that stuff. So hopefully all that works out for the better, because I really enjoy what they do down there. I enjoy watching their coverage, listening to their coverage on the podcast when I can't see it visually. They do a great job. They're really cool people, very inviting. I told them that TJ and I from the football show will be heading down there for a football game when we play them this year. And baby, starting tomorrow, we're going to find out if that's a midweek game or a weekend game. I would love for it to be a weekend game, because I've always had to go down there on a spur of a moment, turn into a work trip, and get down there and try and enjoy Cajun country for about a solid 24 hours, maybe, as I had to drive around Louisiana, seeing some customers before I get to enjoy the aspects of tailgating in the game. But they have definitely thrown out the fact that they'll show us around and show us a good time. So I hope the best comes out of that situation, but I know it's not been real fun. I know they put a lot of hard work and effort into what they do, and I'd like to see that continue down the road, because it helps all of us keep in touch with Louisiana and their team and what's going on in that athletic department. As outsiders, we try and kind of gain that knowledge as much as we can. So that one is, I guess, not necessarily the fact that Troy won a surprise, but to me, the way the game went. And again, in striking distance at halftime, but it still just didn't feel all that close to me. Troy just felt like pretty much in control. They won that second half by 10 points when you break it down by half. And it felt like it always just kind of felt like, even if the Cajuns answered, Troy would just come back down and answer immediately too. And it was just they were never going to get much of a foot in. So it was a struggle for them to continue at that pace that they had. And so ultimately they fall in that one. Troy takes it. And now let's jump into, without further ado, a look at the standings on the men's side. As mentioned, App State sitting in first place at 15-2. To note, even though they beat James Madison, there is a chance that you would call them co-champions for the regular season because of what the record states. Again, the tiebreaker would be for the number 1 seed, and that would absolutely go to the Mountaineers. However, as far as a banner, headline, whatever you want to call it, I'm not sure how many people are going to be hanging banners for a co-championship, but maybe some will. You got to win that game tomorrow night. App State does, if they want to take home a solid sole championship banner, headline, whatever you want to call it, even though they'll probably take home the number 1 seed no matter what. We will have to see technically how that works out. But again, App State currently sits at number 1, James Madison at number 2. App State hasn't beaten James Madison twice already this year. Obviously, their last game is not a matchup between those two teams, so that head-to-head aspect won't matter. Troy sitting at number 3, again, with a solid performance there against the Cajuns. They are sitting at 13-4, 20-10 overall. And the Arkansas State Red Wolves, if you remember, a couple weeks ago, this team was maybe 7 or 8, sitting at 7 or 8 in the conference, just not really getting it done as they expected to before this season got going, but they are absolutely rounding into form now. Again, very, very solid shooters from beyond the arc, and it looks like it's paying dividends at this point. They sit in the number 4 spot currently, and it doesn't look like anybody else can jump above them with only 1 game remaining. Southern Miss at 9-8 behind them, 16-14 overall. Very disappointing season for those down there in Hattiesburg. Again, taking home the regular season championship last year, going to the NIT. I do believe, if I remember correctly from my notes, they did bow out in the very first round of that tournament, but sometimes those are the things that happen when you get a little disappointed with where you end up, obviously. So not happy with that on that side of things. I know that fan base isn't happy with what's going on down there. But again, this is a team that if they wake up and they start playing a little bit more consistently, it is very possible they go on a run. Where they're positioned at currently shows They can win, again, 9 wins, but the inconsistency, 8 losses, and you got to see where that's going to even out. And in a small, short-term format for a tournament, it's exactly what happens sometimes when we get into the March Madness. It's exactly why it has got the name. So we'll see if something like that can transpire there for the Golden Eagle fans. As far as the Cajuns go, again, dropping that game to Troy here last night, they're also sitting there at 9-8. 17, I mean, very much a mirror image of Southern Miss, if you ask me, because this is a team that took the tournament bid last season and went up against Tennessee in that first round. An extremely close game. A lot of people didn't give Louisiana much of a chance going into that one, but they earned the respect after you watch that game. Tennessee was a pretty big favorite to get to at least the Sweet 16, and some people had them going to the Elite Eight. Well, a couple of people had them going to the Final Four. I don't know how many people thought they would be crowned champions. I guess there were a couple brackets that may have had that, probably your Tennessee Volunteer fans. But the Cajuns did everything they could to win that game. They do not have that type of team this year. I don't think they're made up as solidly on the inside. They do have Katinge down low, but I just don't think he's as dominant as a force as they had down low last season. So I do think they are missing that, and that's much like the team right behind them in South Alabama, again, who went on a run, got all the way to that championship game, that final game, and made, again, a game of that one as well, taking the Cajuns down to the wire down there. A great game down there in Pensacola. Again, for those wondering, yes, the tournament is still down there in Pensacola once again this year. I think they have a couple-year contract still left down there. Sitting behind them, another surprise team in a downside this year was Marshall. They had a very good team last year, very formidable. Going into the tournament, a lot of people gave them a great shot at winning it because of the makeup of that team. They did lose quite a bit in the offseason, and they do not return to form here this year. I don't expect them to take much of do a lot of damage in the tournament, but we'll see. Georgia State behind them, sitting there with a 7-10 record as well. 13-16 overall. All these teams here in the middle could steal a game or so, but I think that's probably about it. I don't know if I see anybody from Marshall down doing any real damage. I would say you're looking at teams that are at least at the middle from South Alabama up that could possibly steal up to 2 games before ultimately bowing out to some of these top 4 teams that we're seeing up at the top of this conference right now. But Georgia Southern, again, this is a team, Georgia State and Georgia Southern, really, they're both kind of similar in that regard. They have played some of the tougher teams in this conference very close before losing. In a tournament style like this, where the top teams are sitting for a few days before they get to go, and you're saying some of these teams win a few games before they get there, that's where the playing field could even out a little bit, and this is a little bit different of a situation, right? No one's going to be playing from the comfy confines of their home facility, and that's where, cold shooting starts off because you haven't shot in a game situation in a few days. Other teams are rolling. That's where the craziness happens. We'll have to see if any of that takes place. Again, we'll go through that and here in the next step, but to round out the standings, the bottom 4, we've got Texas State 6-11, ULM also 6-11, Coastal Carolina sitting at 5-12, and ODU, a complete shock to me, at 3-14 there at the very bottom of the conference. They did just hire a brand new head coach to take place of Jeff Jones, and his name is Mike Jones. So for those of you who are rap fans, Mike Jones has that famous rap song, the ODU Monarchist, already put that up and said they're going to have a lot of fun with that. I had a lot of fun when I saw that. I couldn't believe that they thought of rolling that clip when they saw that announcement made, but phenomenal stuff from those guys, and always appreciate interacting with them. Look forward to seeing what Mike Jones can bring to the court there. As we know, or most of us probably know, ODU sitting currently at the bottom of the conference, but at the top of the conference in overall attendance for the season. Yeah, sure, there's been some questions about how many seats are actually filled come game time. Whether you like it or not, most attendance figures are taken by tickets sold, not by butts in seats. But throughout much of the season, sans maybe a game or two here near the end, throughout much of the season, if you did look into the crowd, it was extremely full. So I don't have any doubt that there's a little fudging of the numbers of attendance, but that's not just an ODU thing. That's across the board thing. So I'm not going to hold that against anybody. They clearly are the best team when it comes to attendance and basketball fans in the conference, because let me tell you right now, any other team in this conference would not be number one in the standings or number one in attendance stats if they were bottom of the conference when it comes to record. Nobody else would do that. ODU has done that. The Norfolk area loves basketball. Norfolk State right there has been a tournament team. In fact, a couple years ago, App State, when they made the play-in round, went up against Norfolk State. They did lose that game ultimately. So there is a lot of pride and a lot of talent and a lot of interest in basketball in that area. Or that scene showing you why their attendance figure is so great there in that setup. So I don't really have any question about it. I think I've driven by the facility. Unfortunately, I've never been inside. When I went to go see ODU game in football this year, drove right by the facility. It's a very pretty stadium, very, very eye-popping. Like, it's not some ugly thing that you're just like, what is that? It's a lot of glass in the front, right up against the road as you come in. Good setup. Looks like they got a lot of parking decks around there, so ease of getting to games and going to and from games is probably helpful and why they have such a good attendance record. So anyway, just wanted to touch on that since we had some interactions based on that on social media here recently with them saying they're number one in attendance. But I believe that is a good mark and one that's going to stick there for a little while. Jumping over to a look at the bracket currently. Now, this is not a prediction. This is if the tournament were to start today, what we'd be looking at. So as mentioned, we've got the bottom four teams. We'd have ULM matching up with Coastal Carolina in a first round game. We also have Texas State matching up with ODU. If I had to pick a game I'm watching or focusing on between the two of them, again, they're not going to be running at the same time, but if you're just going to pick one, I'm going to say Texas State ODU is likely to be a pretty good game. Not so sure we're going to get that same quality from Coastal Carolina and ULM. I would expect to take ULM in that game. That second game between Texas State and ODU, much more of a toss-up for me as far as who I'd pick moving forward. We'll have to see if this new coaching announcement and, you know, I would assume that the new head coach doesn't quite take over yet, but maybe he's there. Maybe he's participating in some form or fashion. But that's a factor here that I really don't know how to predict. I don't think that kind of a change is going to suddenly lead them to go 2 or 3 wins deep into this tournament, but it could help them get past Texas State in the first round. However, we've seen Texas State take down a team such as App State, who literally sitting at the top of the conference. So Texas State is a very formidable team. And I would believe with everything going on with ODU, again, coaching change, not really sure exactly how that's going to transition during this time period. I say because of that, I probably would maybe favor Texas State, but still kind of a coin toss for me. I don't think I'm putting money on a game like that. But that winner would go on to play the Cajuns, which would become a very interesting matchup depending on how well that winning team played in that first round. We know that the Cajuns, again, were up at the top of the conference in the standings, but have taken a big hit here lately. Does that decline kind of continue, or do they kind of round back into form come tournament time? Again, this is the team that went deep into this and took the championship last year before going on to March Madness in the big dance. Can they do that again? I don't know if they're quite built for it this season, but we'll have to see how that rolls. The winner of ULM Coastal Carolina would then play Southern Miss in the next round. That would be a tough matchup for either team, although ULM probably could stand a better chance of beating Southern Miss than Coastal Carolina would. I'm going to pull that up as we speak right now because I think ULM did take at least one of 2 matchups from Southern Miss this season. And let's see here. So Southern Miss did beat them one time, and yeah, they did split. They did split the season series, so that would be an interesting matchup to see because ULM has won the most recent game between the two teams. And that was a 68-59 final. So we'll have to see if those two teams match up again. Up towards the top, you'd have Marshall taking on Georgia State. I don't know how much I'd favor anybody greatly in that one, although I think with how Turner can play and what I've seen out of Marshall more lately, I haven't been as impressed as I would say with Georgia State. I do think Georgia State has a very good chance to play some good games. Again, maybe they've not finally gotten some of those wins, but they've played some teams really well and really close here kind of lately. So I guess I would favor Georgia State to move on in that one. Again, that winner would again take on the top seed, Appalachian State. An interesting one there. App State hadn't lost to either of those two teams this season, so it will be interesting to see if they have any shot. I would favor App in that one. Again, the USM winner would then play Arkansas State. I think if I'm taking a favorite in that one again, I don't see much of these top four teams getting upset. I'll cut to the chase before we can get to the bottom side of this bracket to kind of take a look at that. I don't see any of these top four teams losing a game here. I think they all kind of move on to the semifinals. But we'll continue with this exercise just to kind of go through if the Cajuns could technically, lose to Texas State or ODU. I think they could. I don't think they will. I think the Cajuns would move on to face Troy. I do think that's an interesting matchup. If anybody were to possibly get upset there in that quarterfinal round, that one's possible. But we've seen all season that maybe Troy doesn't have the individual talent or the individual players or the superstars, even though Eugene's a great player. But he's not always leading the team. It's spread out really well. They were a very solid team overall instead of just having one superstar to keep going to. Cajuns are kind of built similarly. So if they get hot and they come in with a game in hand with a hot shooter, and Troy hasn't played in a couple days, could be interesting there. We'll have to see if that matchup ends up happening or if I'm wrong and one of those bottom feeder teams ends up beating the Cajuns in that first round matchup, or if Cajuns even stay in that spot coming in. At the bottom, set up currently, South Alabama would take on Georgia Southern. That is an interesting matchup for me. I would probably favor the Jags with how they've been playing lately. And Georgia Southern, yeah, they had some wins. Again, could they get hot and take a one early here? Maybe. No matter what, I don't think if they still match up with James Madison after that, I don't think either one of these teams is taking down JMU. If I had to favor one that would be more likely to do so, again, I'd still favor the Jags to do that more than I would take Georgia Southern in that aspect. So with that being said, you've got a pretty much chalk bracket. So I'm wrong already because it's very rarely chalk, but we'll see if that happens. You would have a semifinal matchup featuring App State and Arkansas State. Excuse me. And that's a dangerous one. If you want to ask me, App State is a solid team with a solid record, with some really good players, with some pretty good depth. On paper, App State should win that game. However, this is, again, a short, fast tournament style game at this point. And if you go cold, and if Arkansas State attacks you from the perimeter and they don't need to beat Spiller and Abson down low, and they have success at the three and the free throw line, that's a dangerous matchup for me, quite frankly. And I think it's one that App could absolutely lose. Again, I would think coming in, they'll absolutely be favored. They should win the game. But that's one that I don't know. As an App fan, obviously wearing it tonight, I don't want to see that game. I'd rather see somebody take down Arkansas State before we get to that level, because I do think Arkansas State is probably one of the most dangerous teams in this tournament. Getting hot at the right time of the year. Again, a couple weeks ago, they weren't in these top four. They weren't even being thought of and to be in the top four. That was Louisiana. They have kind of switched places with where they've been. So now Arkansas State's sitting up there pretty right up there with number one App State on that side of the bracket. So that game, I'm not going to consider it necessarily a toss-up, but it will be interesting to see how both of those teams perform before that matchup possibly happens. On the other side, again, I would favor a Troy-James Madison matchup. I think that one's going to be absolutely fantastic as well. Man, I don't believe Troy or James Madison has played each other this year. Let's pull that up as we talk here. But if they have, it was earlier this season, because nothing here recently is ringing any bells. But we'll pull that up and just make sure that right now, yes, they did not match up this year. So that's a very interesting aspect. And, you know, honestly, I don't think App State matched up with Arkansas State at all this season either. So those would be fun matchups because you don't really have anything to lean on except for what happened in the game previously before this. And for all four of those top teams, obviously, this will be their first game. So, man, again, just to move on to the next thing, I'm saying James Madison's only got 3 losses completely on the season. For that reason, I'll take them to move on. But I think that one could absolutely be a Troy victory as well. That would set up a matchup between App State and James Madison, which would be what everybody pretty much has on paper going in. Again, this is too much chalk for me to think I'd actually be right. It's just too convenient, too easy. It's just not going to happen this way. But I'm trying to break it down and see what this is going to look like. We've got some comments on the Instagram Live. ODU is a new coach. Seth and some guy named Dolphin Nation are going at it. ODU sucks. Somebody says, Dolphin says, Seth, you suck. So the trash talking has begun. None of these teams are going to get an NCAA tournament win. Wow, this guy's a great fan of the Sun Belt. He's shouting out Mike Jones as ODU's next coach. He was at the game, and it was loud. But, yeah, I guess ODU fans don't like the rest of the conference and don't want to see any success from anybody else. So we've got that to go off of. So enjoy that. I guess that's going to win you a lot of favors over there being ODU fans. I like the trash talk, but when you don't think anybody from the conference is capable of winning the game in the NCAA tournament, I don't think you've watched enough basketball this year if that's truly your opinion, because there's been a lot of top teams that have lost some games. And then some of them have been very recently. The NCAA tournament is a whole nother beast, and we'll see what happens. But again, nobody thought Louisiana stood much of a chance against Tennessee last year, and they took them to an absolute wire in that game, earned a lot of respect in that one. Unfortunately for them, that success also led to a couple of their players getting poached in the offseason by bigger programs. So we'll see. I really don't think that well, let's just talk about this while we're at it. Is there any chance or slight possibility the Sun Belt gets 2 teams into the NCAA tournament? This has historically been a pretty consistently bad basketball conference. Okay, we're not going to sugarcoat that. We're not going to skate around it. But you have a team in James Madison who has lost a total of 3 games. Yes, they do not have the strongest strength of schedule. Yes, their win over Michigan State, as impressive as it was to start the season, has proven not to be a massive victory with where Michigan State has ended. However, Michigan State does still appear to be a tournament team. With that being said, it's hard to leave out a team who possibly wins 30-plus games or 30 games right at that mark, only losing 3, beating another team that might end up in the tournament, is likely to end up in the tournament, and then tell this other team that they aren't deserving. Now, if JMU bows out in their first quarterfinal matchup here in this tournament, I'd say your chances are shot completely. If they win the tournament, obviously they're automatic qualifier. So those are the all the way highs and all the way lows. What if something else happens? I still think if they make it to the semifinals and lose, it's probably the same fate as losing in the first game that they'd play in. I don't think that a loss against anybody in the Sun Belt from that side that early on in the tournament is going to do them any favors. What they have to do is at least get to the championship game. And honestly, that's where the eye test is also going to come in part of this too. They can't get beat by 20 points in the championship game. I don't care who it is, if it's Arkansas State, App State, Southern Miss. You can't lose the championship game by blowout fashion and hope to back your way into NCAA's as a two-bid league that has historically been only one. There are a ton of great mid-major basketball teams every year, really, but specifically this year, there is a lot of them. And a lot of them have stronger strength of schedules than James Madison. So it's going to be real hard to press, even if they get to the championship game, if they lose in blowout fashion. It's got to be a close loss. I mean, obviously, if you're a fan of one of these teams, you don't care about this. But as an outsider looking at the conference overall, what you want to see probably, again, if you're not a fan of these two teams, you're not going to like this. But if you want to see a two-bid league, what pretty much has to happen is App State has to beat, because App State's not going to be an at-large. They've got too many losses, and too many of those losses are bad. So even if they get to the championship game and lose, I do not think App State has a chance in at-large bid whatsoever. So App State, to make it, obviously has to win the tournament, be the automatic qualifier. For James Madison to make it, we'll go back to that, they have to lose a close game, probably something like an overtime game or a last-second shot from half court kind of thing, lose a heartbreaking fashion game where somebody goes, man, that team's really good, and they just barely lost, and they only have 4 total losses on the season. Meanwhile, you're debating the team that has maybe a stronger strength of schedule, but is sitting there with 7, 8, 9 losses. And you got to compare that. That's where that blind resume you always see every single year, where they put 2 or 3 or 4 teams up, and they take the names away, and they say, here's the big wins, here's the big losses, that are the big wins, bad losses, and then kind of everything in between. And they throw out a couple other crazy stats to try and get you to kind of feel one way or another. And then they reveal the names, and you go, oh, wow, I didn't know I would have put, so-and-so in over so-and-so based on name alone. That's kind of how James Madison would make it into this tournament. And it's really the only way. I think if you look at the name, I don't know if it's a big enough draw at this point to get there. Plus, not only does this tournament matter, right? So we just broke down this tournament specifically. What you also have to have happen is, outside of this tournament, you need help. You need some of these other teams that are bubble teams, 1 or 2 wins or losses away. You need them to lose early. You need as many of them to lose. You're just rooting for other teams to lose. It doesn't matter what the name on the jersey says. You're hoping that any of those teams that are bubble teams lose. And that way you can back in. Obviously, when you take your pride into that, you don't want a bunch of teams to lose just to back your way in. But that's the fact of the matter. That's what it's going to take from a program and a conference that has not historically been in that spot. So we'll see if that type of thing happens. Again, it's going to be very tough. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be likely. Again, I think T3, who does a lot of predictions of brackets on Twitter, has put JMU's chance at a less than 1% chance. And I think he's even had App State in there kind of recently as well, if they don't win the automatic qualifier. So he's not rounding in the fact that they could win that. It's just based on, if they didn't win their conference tournament, what are their chances? So App State, slim to none. James Madison, also slim to none. However, a little bit better just because of the overall mark. So you've got to just keep winning if you're James Madison and hope that happens. And we'll see what happens. What's your score prediction for Georgia Southern versus South Alabama? If that game is to happen, because again, we have some matchups, and we'll get to that in the next slide here. But if that game is to happen, I do favor the Jags, as I just said a little bit ago. I just think they have a bigger, stronger inside presence down low, and I think that could be a big factor here. As far as outside shooting goes, I don't think one's massively better than the other, but I think that inside presence down low favors the Jags in that one. And I would think that they would get that matchup very possibly with James Madison after that one. Thank you guys for the comments coming in. It looks like Instagram is the big comment winner tonight. Definitely far and away the most comments we've had through Instagrams thus far. So appreciate all the interaction over there tonight. Let's look at those matchups that are going to lead into the final standings when we get back into this bracket after Friday night's games. Again, Arkansas State matches up with App State. This could be a very quick rematch down in Pensacola if everything goes, according to plan, or however you want to say that. This game leads in the night for all the games overall. A 6:30 Eastern start, 5:30 Central on ESPN Plus. All games on ESPN Plus, as all tournament games will be on ESPN Plus. sans the championship. I don't think either one of the semifinal games are on ESPN Plus. In fact, I can jump back to this. I think it's listed here. Yeah, all games on ESPN Plus, but the championship will be on ESPN2. So, with that being said, if you're not an ESPN Plus subscriber, no free ads ESPN Plus, but if you're a Sunbelt fan, you should be on that train already because you're going to see your favorite team play multiple times across multiple sports. It just makes too much sense. It's not that much extra. You're going to get your money's worth, especially if you are like me and live 3+ hours away from any Sunbelt team. I'm about 3 hours from Conway, 3 hours from Boone, probably about 3 hours from Norfolk as well, and about 4 from JMU. So that's kind of where I'm centrally located, but unfortunately not right down the road from any of them. So ESPN Plus is a massive factor in how I keep up and cover all this stuff myself. Next matchup of the night would pit Marshall going up against Georgia State. Once again, jump it back over. This could be a quick, fast rematch in the second round of the Sun Belt Conference Tournament as well. ODU, Georgia Southern could be the other one, but that would not be a rematch because ODU is too far down in the standings for that one to happen. But you have a team in ODU who's now, like we just said, got a new coach. Again, how much of a part of this is he remains to be seen. Could they go out in a blaze of glory on the last game and get a win over Georgia Southern? Georgia Southern hasn't been all that much impressive. I don't know what happens there. Flip a coin. Take somebody there. But again, too many question marks for me to feel comfortable on that one. James Madison goes up against Coastal Carolina. I fully expect this one to be a bloodbath down there in Conway. I do not expect this one to be close with JMU fighting for what they need to have. Let's just say this. If they lose this game to Coastal, there's absolutely 0% chance they get in as an at-large. You absolutely have to win this last one in the regular season and, again, advance through the conference tournament for that to be a shot. Coastal Carolina, I don't think is much of a threat to them in that one. ULM would then match up with South Alabama. Again, this one could be a really good matchup. One probably second to Arkansas State and App State. This is the second game of the night that I would watch with the most interest, followed closely by the last one, but we are not quite there yet. I do think this one is interesting with where both teams are and where they could possibly swap in the could they swap in the standings? Let me see real quick. 6 and 11 and 7 and 10. Yeah, they absolutely could swap. A lot of those teams from South Alabama to ULM, there's about 5 teams there that all could kind of slide around a little bit depending on what happens Friday night. So a lot of movement, very, very possible in the middle part of this bracket and in the standings to get to where we're going to see before the tournament starts. In the second to last game, Troy will take on Texas State, 8:15 Eastern, 7:15 Central Time. Favor Troy in this one, but I do think Texas State has a chance and the ability to play a pretty good game, especially with this being the last one. I don't really think it's going to help them much in the standings, although, again, they're one of those teams sitting there at 6 and 11 that could jump up a few spots with a massive victory over Troy and really improve their standing when it comes to the bracket side of the conference tournament. To round out the night, we have Southern Miss going up against the Cajuns of Louisiana. Again, early this season or all of last season, this would have been the marquee matchup of the conference slate, especially on the last night of basketball, but regular season basketball, that is. But I just don't think this one has the power that it had coming in. And I do expect hard-fought one here, but I don't know. I would say flip a coin again. I'm not completely sold on either one of these teams being dominant in this game, but we will see what happens in that one as we round out the men's coverage. We'll jump over to the women's side real quick. Look at the standings. Marshall has clinched the regular season title at 16-1, 22-6 overall. Obviously, coming into the season, brand new head coach. She's done great things. Got that program right where they want to be. However, she's stated, and the players have agreed with her, it ain't over. They're not happy with where they're at. Obviously, they do like the fact they won the regular season title, but they don't seem content with being happy about that and celebrating too much. It seemed like they were quickly back to work and expect to still win their last game before rolling into conference tournament time. Troy follows them up at second place. James Madison right behind them. They were up there a little bit more and suffered a defeat to App State here recently. And as you can see on the screen, if you're watching this visually, App State about halfway down here. So that is a big loss for James Madison right before conference tournament time starts. ODU had a good women's team throughout much of the season, jumped up and down just a little bit, but always there in that top 5. They're right now in the 4 position. ULM, women's team, has jumped up here quite a bit here in the last few weeks. They are sit at 10-7, not likely to move at all unless they can get jumped by Southern Miss, who's also sitting there at 10-7. After that, we've got 2 teams tied at 9-8 at Georgia State and the Cajuns. App State sitting at 8-9, possible with a jump up if they can get a victory in their last game. Arkansas State, Iggy Higginbottom, a great player, great early season for the Arkansas State Red Wolves ladies side, but falling apart here towards the end, and with a 6-11 record, aren't likely to move around at all. Coastal Carolina and Georgia Southern both tied at 4-13. Texas State 3-14. And South Alabama rounding it out at 2-15. Those 4 teams will be the bottom 4 teams on the ladies' side of the bracket, and we'll take a look at how that looks also right now. Again, we just stated those 4 teams at the bottom side of the bracket. I would expect Georgia Southern possibly to win that one over Texas State to start it off with. I don't think the Lady Jags are going to turn it around that quickly after a really disappointing season for them. So I would expect the Coastal ladies as well to move on in that one. Up towards the top of the bracket on the ladies' side, the Cajuns would take on Appalachian State. As we just mentioned, App State recently beat James Madison, but consistency has been a problem. It's also been a problem for the Lady Cajuns on that side. I'm just going to throw a toss up here, but I'll favor the A on the shirt. I'll favor the A on the paper. So I'll go with App State possibly taking that one. That matchup would then be underneath that, Georgia Southern versus ULM. ULM just too hot. I think the Lady Warhawks are looking really good right now. I fully expect them to take out Georgia Southern and move on to the next round. The same thing with Southern Miss ladies over the Jags. Not quite as hot as ULM at this point, but I do think that, the Lady Chants. I think I said the Lady Jags, but I would have picked Coastal Carolina to match up with Southern Miss there. I expect Southern Miss to take that one. Arkansas State versus Georgia State. This one's more of a toss-up. Again, Arkansas State's got some players. They could be dangerous here come tournament time if they can turn it on, but they haven't been doing that here lately. I expect Georgia State to actually take this one and move on to play Troy in that next round. We'll go back up the bracket. From this other side, I would expect the Troy ladies to continue their dominance and easily move on past either Arkansas State or Georgia State. But again, I had picked Georgia State in that one. I'd expect Troy to move on. Same thing with the James Madison ladies. Again, they did get upset here lately against App State. Sometimes those losses can lead to a good review, a little refocusing where it needs to be, and they should round back into form and again move on. I don't know how many times I'm going to say it, but it's too much chalk. There's no way I can be right on some of these because I feel like I'm just always picking the favorite when it comes to this. But here's maybe my upset. I'll go with ULM getting past ODU. I think ODU's been pretty consistent all year, but they've had a few games that are kind of surprising about dropping them. That one is one where I feel like ULM could really take advantage and jump up and surprise somebody, and I think it could be there in their first game for ODU in this one. So I'd expect them to possibly get by them and move on. Marshall at the top of the bracket. I don't see Cajuns or App State staying anywhere close to the Thundering Herd, so I do expect fully the Thundering Herd to move on and then also take out ULM and end their run as well, getting them to the championship game on that side of the bracket. Then you've got a matchup of James Madison and Troy ladies. Very, very interesting matchup. I think the history and pedigree favors JMU on that side. But again, James Madison had that loss here very recently to a team in the middle of the standings. You can't have those types of things happen. Does lapse like that happen in the tournament? For that reason, I'm going to favor the Lady Trojans. So we've got a matchup of Marshall and Troy for the championship side on the ladies. We'll see if that comes to fruition. I should write all this down, but I guess I technically wouldn't really write it down until it's official anyway. But that is what I see happening so far. That is how it looks as of today. Again, after tomorrow night's games, we'll take a lot of the look next week before this tournament actually starts rolling and see what we've actually got and see how close maybe I was. And we'll get some predictions. I think we'll have fun with that episode. We'll have a lot of people hopefully interacting on the socials when it comes to that. Tim from Georgia Southern, he's a big Georgia Southern fan. He says, with the women's side of things, watch out for Troy and Old Dominion in the conference tournament. I just spoke about Troy's women being very formidable, very much a great team throughout all season long. Marshall's the obvious favorite here, and I don't think I've seen enough for anybody to really take them out. I think it was James Madison with their only loss this year was to JMU, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going to pull that up right now if anyone's, again, watching and commenting. But yes, it was to James Madison, and it was about a 9 or 10 point game, 9-point game. So we'll see if that matchup could come to fruition. That could make it interesting for Marshall. I'm just not sure if anybody else matches up that well against them, and they don't look to have played Troy this season. So again, there's no real measuring stick if that ends up being the matchup there. But yeah, again, ODU's women very, very solid all season. But again, with streaky teams, hot teams in these tournaments, surprising things happen. ULM is one that I think could jump up and take that game over ODU and surprise them in that, what would that be, the quarterfinal round there. The first game for ODU. Again, ULM could be rolling at that point. They got a game in hand coming in. If they're hot, maybe they keep it rolling. We'll have to see. After this week, after this game's on Friday night, I'm going to get all the stuff ready for next week. We're going to go over some of the conference leaders, or I guess champions at that point, in their respective divisions of points, rebounds, blocks. So I think we'll have a lot of fun with that, and also be looking at what this tournament's going to look like. We do have a special guest coming up. Trevor Elliott from the Two Pointers podcast will jump on probably after the conference tournament, and we'll be talking about whoever wins, what their chances are in the NCAA tournament. And he covers basketball as a whole for both college and pro. He's going to break down the field overall as well to give us a shot and an idea of what we're looking at for the Sun Belt team, what they're going to be up against, who they're going to be up against, and some of his other favorites, Cinderella favorites or heavy favorites, because they're the bigger, stronger programs that are there every year. So stay tuned in the coming weeks. We've also got the basketball show with Seth and Marv, baseball show, with Seth and Marv that started to roll. Been really fun with that. And if you are not watching Sunbelt baseball, you need to. There was 2 phenomenal finishes to games last night, with Troy scoring 4 runs in the bottom of the ninth to win in walk-off fashion. And then somehow, some way, South Alabama Jaguars win in extra innings, coming from behind in both the 9th and 10th inning. Both of those innings come back, and they win in a walk-off strikeout. That's right. I didn't mess that up. Walk-off strikeout. Obviously, ball gets past the guy, you run to the base, the other guy scores. Still, crazy finishes in 2 games last night. Sunbelt also swept the night as a whole. So really impressive start for Sunbelt baseball. Be sure to check us out, 3B, the Belt Baseball Beginners, as we continue to roll along. And man, March Madness right around the corner. So stay tuned. Hopefully the Sun Belt can make some noise here. Maybe, just maybe, we can get 2 teams in. But regardless, we're going to have some fun watching all that, and baseball continues to roll. So until next time, see you later.